The moment I heard Mallory Whitmore's voice crackling through every speaker in our gated community, confessing to selling our entire neighborhood to a shadow development company, I knew the 3-foot mailbox move that started this war had just become evidence in a federal investigation. But let me rewind 6 weeks to show you how a simple act of kindness for our elderly mail carrier exposed the biggest HOA fraud in Texas history, complete with forged documents, stolen land, and a president who called 911 so many times they started sending her the bill. My name is Beckett Hawthorne, and until 6 weeks ago, I lived peacefully on my 2-acre ranch in Willowbrook Estates, a gated community complete with a championship golf course, Olympic-sized pool, and an HOA president who made Stalin look reasonable. The trouble started on a humid Tuesday morning in August when I decided to move my custom-built limestone mailbox exactly 3 feet closer to the road. Our mail carrier, Estelle, was 72 years old and had been struggling to reach our mailboxes from her truck. After watching her nearly fall out trying to deliver a package, I figured moving the 200-pound monument my late father had hand-carved was just basic human decency. The mailbox wasn't just functional, it was art. Dad had spent 3 months carving our family's ranch brand into that Texas limestone, installing a solid brass mail slot that still caught the morning sun, and topping it with a hand-forged copper roof that had aged to perfection. It was the last thing he built before cancer took him 2 years ago. I had barely gotten the heavy-duty dolly secured under the base when I heard the screech of designer brakes behind me. A white Mercedes SUV with HOA President vanity plates came to a dramatic stop, and out burst Mallory Whitmore, like she was responding to a terrorist attack. "Stop right there," she shrieked, her voice hitting frequencies that made my horses pin their ears back in the pasture. "That's HOA property. You can't move anything without board approval." I straightened up slowly, wiping sweat from my forehead. The Texas sun was already brutal at 8 a.m., and I could feel my patience evaporating faster than morning dew. "Mallory, it's my mailbox on my property. I'm moving it 3 feet to help Estelle." Her face went from fake tan orange to apoplectic purple in seconds. "I am the president of this homeowners association, and I decide what happens in Willowbrook Estates." She was already speed dialing on her phone, her acrylic nails clicking against the screen like angry castanets. 911, yes? This is an emergency. Someone is destroying community property at 1427 Bluebonnet Trail. I couldn't help but mutter under my breath. 3 feet is just a distance, but you're about to turn it into a federal case. What struck me as odd, and this should have been my first warning, was how quickly she'd appeared. I'd started moving the mailbox at 7:55 a.m. By 8:02, she was already there, fully dressed in her HOA president power suit, like she'd been watching and waiting. She was also mumbling something about the timeline and phase 1 while waiting for the police. But I was too focused on my aching back to pay much attention. Officer Marcus Rodriguez showed up 20 minutes later, and the look of pure exhaustion on his face when he saw Mallory told me this wasn't his first rodeo with our HOA president. He didn't even hurry getting out of his patrol car, taking a long sip of his coffee before slowly approaching. "Morning, Miss Whitmore," he sighed. "What's the emergency today?" Mallory practically vibrated with righteous indignation. "This man is vandalizing community property. I want him arrested immediately for destruction of HOA assets." Officer Rodriguez looked at me, then at the mailbox that had moved exactly 36 inches from its original position, still sitting well within my property line. "Mr. Hawthorne, want to tell me what's happening here?" I explained about Estelle, showed him my property survey on my phone, and pointed out that the mailbox was still a good 10 feet inside my property line. He nodded, took some notes, and turned back to Mallory with the patience of a kindergarten teacher dealing with a tantrum. "Ma'am, there's no crime here. It's his mailbox on his property. He can paint it pink and put dancing flamingos on it if he wants." Mallory's face went nuclear. "I am the HOA president. I have served this community for 7 years. This is a violation of Covenant 17.3 subsection B. That's nice, ma'am, but it's not a police matter. Have a good day." Officer Rodriguez headed back to his car, but not before giving me a look that clearly said, "Good luck with this one." But Mallory wasn't done, not by a long shot. She spent the next hour documenting the crime scene with her phone, taking hundreds of photos from every conceivable angle. She had a measuring tape in her Louis Vuitton bag, apparently standard equipment for HOA presidents, and measured distances between the mailbox and various landmarks while muttering about evidence and documentation. Before leaving, she slapped a massive red violation sticker across my beautiful limestone mailbox, the acidic adhesive already starting to damage the carefully preserved stone. You'll be hearing from the architectural committee, she hissed. This is just the beginning. That evening, I found a violation notice taped to my door demanding $100 for unauthorized structure relocation and threatening to place a lien on my property if I didn't comply within 72 hours. But something in the attached documentation made my blood run cold. The HOA map showed my property line in a completely different location than my official deed. According to Mallory's version, my property line ran right through the middle of my horse pasture, cutting off nearly half an acre of my land. The boundaries had been redrawn in what looked suspiciously like colored pencil. My neighbor, Sara Delgado, knocked on my door around 8 p.m. She was a 29-year-old freelance marketing consultant who worked from home and had her own collection of Mallory horror stories. 2 years ago, Mallory had fined her $500 for planting pink petunias instead of the approved red ones, claiming they violated the community's aesthetic standards. I saw the circus this morning, Zara said, holding up her phone. Got the whole thing on video. That woman is completely unhinged. We sat on my porch while Zara scrolled through her phone, showing me the footage. You know what's weird? She said suddenly. I've been seeing Mallory out here with measuring tape and spray paint at like 3 in the morning. My security camera catches her all the time. She showed me a grainy night vision video of Mallory spray painting lines near my fence, checking measurements against some kind of map. Beckett. I think she's been marking new property lines all over the neighborhood. As I stared at the hand-drawn map with its convenient new boundaries, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the corner of one page, barely visible under Mallory's modifications, was a logo, Nexus Development Group, Zara. Look at this, I said, pointing to the marking. Why would a developer's logo be on an HOA map? Her eyes widened as we both reached the same conclusion. This wasn't just about a mailbox or even about my property line. Mallory was up to something much bigger. The next morning began what I now call Hell Week, or the 7 days of 911. Day 2 brought another police visit, this time for illegal construction. Officer Chen arrived, trying not to roll her eyes, as Mallory insisted I had built an unauthorized structure on HOA property. Ma'am? He moved a mailbox 3 feet. Officer Chen said patiently, that's not construction. But he used equipment, a dolly. That makes it commercial construction activity in a residential zone, Mallory screeched. Day 3's call was for criminal trespass, because I had walked over to check my own property markers. Mallory claimed I was destroying community property boundaries. Officer Rodriguez was back, and this time he didn't even turn off his engine. Tom? He said through his window, using the wrong name. Between you and me, my sergeant is starting to ask questions about all these calls. 47 calls from the same person in 3 years is 25. Unusual. That's when he lowered his voice. You might want to look into her history with other neighbors. The pattern is interesting. Day 4 brought the most ridiculous accusation yet. Disturbing the peace. My crime? My horse had neighed during Mallory's morning power walk. Officer Chen couldn't hide her disbelief. She claims you're training your horses to harass her, Chen said, struggling to keep a straight face. I grew up with horses, Mr. Hawthorne. They neigh. It's what they do. By day 5, things reached peak absurdity. The call came in foreign. I swear on my father's grave this is true mailbox terrorism. Officer Rodriguez didn't even pretend to take it seriously this time. Mailbox terrorism? He repeated, shaking his head. Beckett, we've been to your property 5 times this week. My sergeant is not happy. The department is considering billing her for false reports. Day 6's call was theft, because I'd photographed her hand-drawn maps when she'd taped them to my door. She's claiming you stole confidential HOA documents, Chen explained, looking embarrassed. But she taped them to my door. I protested. That makes them mine, right? Chen nodded. Any reasonable person would think so. But Mallory Whitmore stopped being reasonable a long time ago. The 7th call was the crown jewel. Assault. The alleged perpetrator? My 23-year-old mare? Buttercup. She says your horse looked at her threateningly, Rodriguez said, not even bothering to get out of his car this time. We both turned to look at Buttercup, who was peacefully munching hay in the shade. That horse's biggest threat is stealing carrots from pockets, I said. Rodriguez sighed deeply. Beckett, we've been called to your property 7 times this week. The chief is furious. He's considering charging her with abuse of emergency services. Document everything. That evening, Zara came over with her laptop. Excited. Beckett, you're not going to believe what I found. I've been checking our neighborhood Facebook page, and Mallory has been doing this to everyone. She showed me post after post from neighbors complaining about mysterious property line changes, sudden violations for things that had been there for years, and aggressive enforcement of rules that seemed to change daily. But what caught my attention was a pattern in the dates. Look, Zara said, all the property line changes started in 2018. Mallory became HOA president in 2017. We spent the next few hours creating a digital map of all the reported changes. The pattern was clear. Every house on our street had lost between 5 and 10 feet of property, all of it mysteriously becoming HOA common area on Mallory's hand-drawn maps. She's stolen almost an acre of land total. Zara calculated, at current values, that's worth over $500,000. But the real shock came when Zara pulled up county records online. Beckett, look at this. 6 months ago, the HOA sold a parcel of excess common area to a company called Davidson Holdings LLC for $200,000. My hands shook as I read the document. Let me guess who owns Davidson Holdings. Zara's fingers flew across the keyboard. Registered owner, Mallory Whitmore. She created a fake company and sold stolen land to herself. But why go through all that trouble? I asked. Zara clicked to another document, and what we found made everything click into place. It was an email between Mallory and someone at Nexus Development Group. The subject line read, Phase 1 complete, ranch acquisition next. The email detailed plans for a 50-home luxury development, but they needed my ranch for access roads. Mallory had replied, working on it? Give me 2 months. The workshop issue needs careful handling. Workshop issue? I felt a chill run down my spine. Dad had built his workshop in 1998, insisting on doing all the foundation work himself. He'd spent weeks on it, working at odd hours, telling everyone he wanted it done right. Now Mallory's cryptic reference made me wonder what he'd really been protecting. The next morning, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I went to the county surveyor's office, where a helpful clerk named Martha recognized my name immediately. Bennett Ranch. Oh, honey. I've been wondering when you'd come in. We've had some very interesting requests about your property lately. She pulled out a thick file. 3 months ago, someone requested all historical surveys of your area. Then they tried to file amended property lines, but the documents were obviously forged. We rejected them, but they kept trying. She showed me the rejected filings. Mallory's handwriting was all over them, attempting to redraw boundaries that had been established for decades. But here's the interesting part, Martha said, lowering her voice. Your father was a smart man. Mr. Hawthorne. He filed this in 1998. It was a certified survey showing our exact property lines, filed with both state and federal authorities. He paid extra for satellite verification and federal registration. These boundaries can't be changed without congressional approval. I stared at the document. Dad had made our property lines essentially unchangeable. There's one more thing, Martha said. Last week, someone tried to access these files using fake credentials. Security caught them on camera. But they ran. It was a woman, 50s, blonde hair. Mallory was getting desperate. That afternoon, Zara called with shocking news. Beckett, I've been monitoring Mallory's HOA emails, don't ask how, and I found something huge. She's not just suing you. She's filed liens against your property, claiming you owe $300,000 in HOA fines. That's impossible. The HOA board dismissed all her fake fines. She filed them before the board meeting, backdated to make them look legitimate. Beckett, she's trying to force a foreclosure. The pieces clicked into place. The 7911 calls were a distraction. While I was defending against her harassment, she was building a paper trail to steal my property through fraudulent liens. But it was what Zara found next that made my blood run cold. She'd managed to capture audio from Mallory's late-night property marking expeditions. In the recording, Mallory was on the phone with someone. The ranch has to go. Once it's designated as common area, they can't stop the sale. There was a pause as someone responded. I don't care what's under the old workshop. We'll deal with that after the property transfer. The environmental reports can be buried like everything else. Under the workshop? Environmental reports? I thought back to Dad's final years, trying to remember if he'd ever mentioned anything unusual about that spot. He'd built the workshop himself in 1998, pouring the foundation alone. At the time, I thought he was just being his usual perfectionist self. But now, with Mallory's ominous words echoing in my ears, I wondered if there had been more to it. That evening, as I stood in Dad's workshop, I noticed something I'd overlooked for years. The foundation was incredibly thick, much thicker than necessary for a simple workshop. And in one corner, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a small metal plate with numbers etched into it. GPS coordinates. My hands trembled as I entered the coordinates into my phone. They led to a spot directly under the workshop's center. Whatever Dad had hidden or protected there, Mallory knew about it, and she was willing to destroy evidence, faux documents, and steal an entire neighborhood to get to it. I was still processing this discovery when my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Hawthorne? The voice was male, professional, and cold. You've been interfering with a significant business arrangement? Miss, Whitmore's debts are now your problem. We'll be in touch about compensation. The line went dead. I stood in my father's workshop, surrounded by his tools and memories, as the magnitude of what I'd uncovered hit me. This wasn't just about an HOA president gone rogue. Mallory was working with dangerous people, and they just made me their target. Outside, I heard sirens approaching. Multiple sirens. Through the workshop window, I could see police cars, but also black SUVs that definitely weren't local law enforcement. As they screeched to a stop in front of my house, I noticed Zara running across the yard, laptop in hand, shouting something about the PA system. That's when I heard it. Mallory's voice, clear as day, booming through every speaker in Willowbrook Estates. But she wasn't making an HOA announcement. She was confessing, told them the ranch was an easy target. $20 million for the whole development. And all I had to do was move some property lines, but that idiot Hawthorne had to move his damn mailbox and ruin everything. The sirens were getting louder. Car doors were slamming, and Mallory's confession continued to echo through our gated community, exposing 7 years of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. As federal agents surrounded my house and Mallory's voice revealed name after name of everyone involved in the conspiracy, I realized that moving my mailbox 3 feet hadn't just started a war. It had triggered an avalanche that was about to bury Willowbrook Estates' entire power structure. The confession continued, Mallory's voice growing more frantic with each word. Richardson said if I couldn't get the Bennett Ranch by September, they'd send their cleanup specialist. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. It was supposed to be simple: forge some documents, move some lines, force a few foreclosures. Zara appeared at my workshop door, breathing hard, her laptop still glowing. I hacked her car's Bluetooth, she gasped. She's on a call with someone named Richardson right now, and her car's system is broadcasting through every smart speaker in Willowbrook. Through the workshop window, I watched federal agents and FBI windbreakers surround Mallory's Mercedes, which was parked haphazardly near the community center. She was still inside, gesticulating wildly, completely unaware that her confession was being broadcast to all 400 homes in our gated community. The environmental reports were the real problem. Mallory's voice continued through the speakers. Nexus knew about the contamination under the whole neighborhood from the old Brackenridge chemical plant. That's why they needed the Bennett workshop gonnets, sitting right on top of the old waste site. One soil test and the EPA would shut down everything. My blood ran cold. Dad hadn't been protecting something, he'd been protecting everyone. The workshop's thick foundation wasn't to hide something, it was to seal something in. Agent Sarah Chenot, the local officer. But a federal agent with the same last name approached me with her badge displayed. Mr. Hawthorne, we need to secure this workshop immediately. Do not let anyone near it until our hazmat team arrives. $47 million in cleanup costs. Mallory's voice was reaching hysteria. Richardson promised if we could demolish everything before the quarterly EPA review, we could build over it and no one would ever know. The buyers would get sick eventually. Sure. But we'd be in Costa Rica by then. The neighborhood was in chaos. People were pouring out of their houses, some in bathrobes, others abandoning their morning jogs. Everyone was staring at the speakers in horror as their HOA president casually discussed poisoning them for profit. Ma'am, you need to end that call and exit the vehicle. An agent's voice boomed through a megaphone. Through the speakers, we heard Mallory gasp, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Is this am I on speaker? Richardson, you said the car was secure." A man's voice, cold and threatening, came through clear as day. "You stupid woman, you've destroyed everything. You know what happens to people who compromise our operations." The line went dead. Mallory burst out of her car, running in her designer heels toward the community's back gate. She made it about 30 feet before 3 agents tackled her into the fountain she'd had installed last year with misallocated HOA funds. As they hauled her away in handcuffs, still screaming about her rights as HOA president, Agent Chen turned to me with a grim expression. "Mr. Hawthorne, that recording just gave us what we needed to take down a multi-state fraud and environmental crime ring. But I need to ask, did your father ever mention why he built that workshop specifically there? I pulled out my phone, showing her the GPS coordinates I'd found. Just these numbers etched into a plate in the foundation. Her face went pale as she recognized the coordinates. Those aren't just random numbers. That's the exact center of the contamination plume. Your father built that workshop to mark and seal the worst of it. As hazmat trucks rolled into our perfect gated community and neighbors stood in shock on their manicured lawns, one thought kept racing through my mind. Dad had spent his last years not just building a workshop, but building a barrier between his community and disaster, and Mallory Whitmore, in her greed to steal a few feet here and there, had almost destroyed it all. Agent Chen's radio crackled. "We've got Richardson. He was trying to flee through the golf course. And Chen? You're gonna want to see what we found in his car." Maps of 17 other neighborhoods, all with HOA presidents on the Nexus payroll. As the agent walked away to coordinate the investigation, I stood in my father's workshop, finally understanding his last words to me. "Protect this place, son, not just the ranch hall of it." The war that started with moving a mailbox 3 feet had just exposed a conspiracy that reached across the entire state, and somewhere in Costa Rica, 17 other HOA presidents were about to have their vacation plans seriously disrupted. The morning after Mallory Whitmore's spectacular arrest, I woke up to find 17 news vans parked outside my ranch and approximately 200 neighbors gathered at my gate. The story had gone viral overnight. HOA president's hot mic confession exposes multi-million-dollar toxic cover-up, and suddenly everyone wanted answers about what exactly was under our perfect gated community. Agent Sarah Chen had set up a temporary FBI command center in the Willowbrook Community Center, the same room where Mallory had held her tyrannical HOA meetings for 7 years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She'd asked me to come in at 8 a.m. sharp, and as I walked through the crowd of neighbors, I heard fragments of conversations that made my blood run cold. 30 years we've lived here, and now they're saying the ground is poisoned. My daughter has had asthma since we moved in. Property values are going to tank. Inside the command center, Agent Chen was surrounded by environmental experts, federal prosecutors, and enough computer equipment to launch a space shuttle. She looked up as I entered, gesturing to a chair across from her makeshift desk. "Mr. Hawthorne, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room until we make an official announcement," she began, her voice grave. "The preliminary soil tests around your father's workshop confirm our worst fears. The contamination levels are 40 times the EPA's maximum safe limits." I felt the room spin slightly. 40 times? Your father's workshop is sitting on top of what was the Brackenridge Chemical Company's illegal dump site from 1962 to 1978. They produced industrial solvents, and when the company folded, they simply buried everything and sold the land to developers. She pulled up a map on her laptop, showing contamination plumes spreading under our neighborhood like cancer. The only reason this entire community isn't a Superfund site is your father's workshop. He didn't just build on top of the worst contamination, he essentially created a concrete cap that's been containing it for 26 years. "How did he know?" I asked. Though I was beginning to piece it together, Agent Chen slid a folder across the desk. "We found these in Mallory's house. Your father was a surveyor for the county before he retired." "Correct. In 1997, he discovered the original Brackenridge disposal records while researching property lines. Instead of going public, which would have destroyed property values and displaced hundreds of families, he quietly built that workshop to seal the main contamination point." I opened the folder with trembling hands. There was my father's handwriting, meticulous notes about chemical levels, disposal sites, and containment strategies. He'd spent months researching the best way to protect the community without causing panic. But Mallory knew. Chen continued. "We found correspondence dating back to 2017 when she became HOA president. Nexus Development Group approached her with a deal: help them acquire the properties sitting on the contamination, demolish everything before any environmental assessment, and build new homes on top. The new buyers would never know until it was too late. And my ranch was crucial because it's the only access point for heavy equipment that could reach the workshop without going through residential streets. They needed your property to quietly demolish the containment before anyone noticed." A knock on the door interrupted us. Another agent entered, his face grim. "Chen, you need to see this. We just arrested Richardson at his hotel, and he's already talking. Says he wants a deal." Chen stood up. "Mr. Hawthorne, I need to handle this. But before you go, recommending immediate evacuation for the 17 homes closest to the contamination sites. I'm sorry, but that includes the Delgados. My heart sank thinking about Zara and her family. As I left the command center, I found her in the crowd outside, still live streaming developments to her 20,000 followers who'd been watching this unfold in real time. "Beckett," she called out, pushing through the crowd. "Is it true? Are we really sitting on toxic waste?" I couldn't lie to her. "The FBI says 17 homes need to evacuate." "Zara, I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" She surprised me by laughing. "Beckett, you just saved our lives. If Mallory had succeeded, if they'd demolished that workshop and built those new homes, hundreds of families would have been poisoned. You're a hero." But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a son who was finally understanding the weight his father had carried alone for years. That afternoon, the EPA arrived in force. Hazmat teams in full protective gear began setting up monitoring equipment throughout Willowbrook Estates. The 17 affected families were relocated to hotels at government expense, and lawyers were already circling like sharks smelling blood in the water. That's when Mallory's lawyer showed up at my door. Bradley Morrison looked exactly like what you'd expect from a defense attorney willing to represent someone who'd tried to poison an entire community for profit. Expensive suit, practiced smile, and dead eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said smoothly, "my client would like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. Your client is facing federal charges for environmental crimes, fraud, and conspiracy." I replied, "What could she possibly offer me?" He smiled wider. "Information. Mallory was a small fish in a very large pond. She has names, dates, and financial records, everything needed to take down Nexus Development Group and the 17 other HOA presidents involved in similar schemes across the state. In exchange for what? She testifies against the others, pleads to lesser charges, serves maybe 5 years instead of 30. I was about to tell him exactly where he could shove his plea deal when Agent Chen appeared behind me. "Mr. Morrison, any deals go through the federal prosecutor's office, not through civilians." "Nice try." Though, as Morrison retreated to his Tesla, Chen turned to me. "He's not wrong about Mallory having valuable information, but don't worry, she's not getting off easy. The recording of her confession, thanks to Miss Delgado's creative car hacking, has given us everything we need." That evening, the first of many town halls was held in the Willowbrook High School gymnasium. The FBI, EPA, and CDC had representatives there. Along with enough lawyers to populate a small country, the mood was a volatile mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. "How long have we been exposed?" demanded Jim Patterson, whose family had lived in Willowbrook for 15 years. The EPA representative, Dr. Emily Foster, no relation to Mallory. She quickly clarified, took the microphone. "Based on our preliminary findings, the contamination has been largely contained thanks to the concrete barrier created by Miss Bennett's workshop. However, we found elevated levels of trichloroethylene in the groundwater near the 17 homes closest to the site. Is that why my son has leukemia?" Maria Rodriguez's voice broke as she asked the question everyone was thinking. "We can't make that determination yet," Dr. Foster said carefully. "We'll be conducting comprehensive health screenings for all residents, past and present." The meeting devolved into chaos as people demanded answers that nobody could give yet. Property values, health concerns, lawsuits, cleanup costs. 26 years of hidden contamination had suddenly burst into the open, and the community was reeling. I slipped out during the shouting match about who should pay for the cleanup and found myself walking to Dad's workshop. The EPA had sealed it off with yellow tape, declaring it a critical containment structure that couldn't be disturbed until they figured out a permanent solution. Standing there in the dark, I finally understood why Dad had insisted I never sell the ranch, never let anyone demolish the workshop. He'd made himself the guardian of a terrible secret to protect hundreds of families. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your father was a fool? He could have made millions. Now you'll pay for his stupidity." Before I could respond, another text. "Richardson talked. We know he did. Your ranch will burn before you testify." I immediately forwarded the threats to Agent Chen, who responded within minutes. "Pack a bag. We're putting you in protective custody." But I wasn't going anywhere. This was my land, my father's legacy, and I'd be damned if I'd let these criminals drive me off it. The next morning brought a new circus to Willowbrook. Environmental lawyers had descended like locusts, setting up temporary offices in the strip mall across from our main gate. They promised residents millions in damages, posting billboards with slogans like "Poisoned by greed? We can help," and "Toxic OA? Toxic settlements." I was feeding my horses when Zara appeared. Despite the evacuation order for her house, she was dragging a suitcase and had her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "I'm not supposed to be here," she said, "but I had to grab some things. Plus, I've been doing some digging of my own." She opened her laptop right there by the horse pasture. "Remember how Mallory mentioned 17 other neighborhoods? I've been tracking down the HOA presidents she named in her confession. Look at this." The screen showed a map of Texas with red pins marking each compromised neighborhood. The pattern was clear. All were built on former industrial sites, all had HOA presidents who'd been in power for at least 5 years. And all had experienced mysterious property line changes. "It's a whole network," Zara explained. "Nexus Development wasn't just one company, it's a syndicate. They specifically target neighborhoods built on contaminated land, install their own HOA presidents, and then slowly steal property until they can redevelop and sell to unsuspecting buyers." "How many people are we talking about?" She pulled up another screen. "Based on the property records I found, at least 12,000 homes across Texas. If the average home price is $300,000, we're looking at a $3.6 billion fraud." The number was staggering. Mallory hadn't just been stealing from Willowbrook, she'd been part of a massive criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. "There's more," Zara said. "I found Mallory's personal financial records. Don't ask how. She was paid $50,000 for each property she helped acquire, plus 10% of any eventual sale. Over 7 years, she made almost $2 million, while poisoning her own neighbors," I said, feeling sick. The really twisted part? She knew about the contamination the whole time. I found emails where she jokes about it. One says, "At least they'll be too sick to sue us from their hospital beds." As if the universe had been listening. My phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who'd helped me research Mallory's false property lines. "Beckett, I've just come from the federal courthouse," she said. Without preamble, Mallory's been formally charged with 47 counts of fraud, conspiracy, environmental crimes, and this is the big one: attempted murder. Attempted murder? The prosecutor's arguing that knowingly exposing people to toxic chemicals while preventing cleanup efforts constitutes attempted murder. If convicted on all counts, she's looking at life in prison. But Mallory wasn't going down without a fight. That afternoon, she did what every criminal with money does: went on the offensive. The lawsuit arrived by courier at 3 p.m. Mallory was suing me personally for $5 million, claiming defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And this was rich trespassing on HOA property. She also named Zara as a co-defendant for the illegal hacking that had exposed her confession. "She's trying to intimidate us," Jennifer said when I called her. "It's a classic slap-suit strategic lawsuit against public participation. She wants to bury us in legal fees and force a settlement." Can she actually win? Not a chance. Her own confession destroys any defamation claim, and the trespassing charge is laughable, since she admitted to falsifying property lines. But defending against it will cost money. That's when the community stepped up in a way that would have made my father proud. Within hours of the lawsuit becoming public, someone created a GoFundMe page titled "Defend the Heroes Who Exposed Willowbrook's Toxic Secret." By midnight, it had raised over $100,000. Messages poured in from current and former residents, thanking us for revealing the truth. One message stood out: "My daughter developed respiratory problems after we moved to Willowbrook. Doctors couldn't figure out why. We moved away 3 years ago, and she's been healthy ever since. Thank you for proving we weren't imagining things." The Chen family. But the real bombshell came the next morning, when Richard Richardson, Nexus Development CEO, decided to flip on everyone to save his own skin. Agent Chen called me at 6 a.m. "You need to see this. Richardson just gave us everything: financial records, communication logs, even recordings of meetings where they discussed the contamination cover-ups." I met her at the command center, where she played one particularly damning recording. Richardson's voice was clear. "The beauty of the HOA scheme is that these presidents have almost unlimited power. They can change rules, impose fines, force sales. It's like having a private government. And the best part? Homeowners associations have almost no oversight." Another voice, identified as Nexus's CFO. "What about the health risks? We're building on literal toxic waste." Richardson laughed. "By the time anyone gets sick enough to investigate, we'll have sold everything and dissolved the company. The liability will fall on the new property owners and their insurance companies." The recording continued with discussions of bribes to local officials, plans to destroy environmental records, and strategies for silencing anyone who asked too many questions. They mentioned my father by name. Bennett's the only real threat, Richardson said. He knows about Brackenridge, but he's too worried about property values to go public. As long as that workshop stands, we're safe. Once we get the property and demolish it, no one will ever know. Agent Chen paused the recording. This was from a meeting in 2019. They've been planning to take your ranch for 5 years. So Dad knew he was a target? Based on other documents we found. Yes, he upgraded his home security in 2018, started documenting everything, and even met with an environmental lawyer about setting up a trust to protect the workshop. Unfortunately, he passed away before finalizing anything. The weight of it all, Dad's secret burden, the years of planning, the constant vigilance hit me like a physical blow. He'd spent his final years not just fighting cancer, but fighting to protect hundreds of families from an invisible poison. That afternoon, the EPA announced their findings at another packed town hall. The contamination was worse than initially thought, but miraculously, Dad's workshop had prevented the worst of it from spreading. The cleanup would take years and cost an estimated $80 million. Who's paying for this? Someone shouted from the crowd. Dr. Foster adjusted hair microphone. The EPA will pursue cost recovery from all responsible parties, including Brackenridge Chemicals' successor companies, Nexus Development Group, and any individuals who knowingly concealed the contamination. What about our property values? Another voice called out. This time, a lawyer from the Justice Department answered. We're working with federal programs to ensure no homeowner bears the financial burden of this contamination. Additionally, the criminal restitution from the conspirators will go directly to affected residents. But the real drama was yet to come. 2 days later, Mallory decided to represent herself in court, against the advice of literally everyone. She fired Bradley Morrison and announced she would prove her innocence by exposing the real conspiracy against her. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be routine, just entering pleas and setting trial dates. Instead, it turned into the Mallory Whitmore show, and not in the way she intended. She arrived in full HOA president regalia, wearing her official blazer with the Willowbrook Estates crest and carrying a briefcase full of what she claimed was exonerating evidence. The federal courtroom was packed with neighbors, reporters, and what seemed like half the FBI's Dallas office. Judge Patricia Hawkins, a no-nonsense veteran of federal court, looked decidedly unimpressed as Mallory approached the defendant's table. Miss Whitmore, I strongly advise you to reconsider representing yourself, the judge said. The charges against you are extremely serious. Mallory's voice rang out clear and defiant. Your Honor, I've been president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association for 7 years. I've successfully mediated dozens of disputes and enforced hundreds of regulations. I think I can handle my own defense. What followed was a masterclass in self-destruction. Mallory began by trying to enter her hand-drawn property maps as evidence, claiming they were more accurate than government surveys. When the prosecutor pointed out they were drawn in crayon and colored pencil, she insisted that was an artistic choice that doesn't diminish their legal validity. Then she tried to blame everything on me. Beckett Hawthorne orchestrated this entire situation, she declared, pointing at me in the gallery. He moved that mailbox specifically to provoke me, knowing I would have to respond as HOA president. This was entrapment. The prosecutor, Assistant O.S. Attorney James Liu, calmly destroyed her argument. Miss Whitmore, are you suggesting Mr. Hawthorne somehow forced you to falsify documents, steal property, and conspire with developers to hide toxic contamination? He manipulated the situation, Mallory insisted. That workshop isn't protecting anything. It's hiding something illegal, probably drugs or weapons. Then why? Liu asked smoothly. Did you tell Nexus Development you needed to demolish it before environmental inspections? Mallory's face went through several color changes. That's taken out of context. Would you like me to play the full recording? No, Mallory shrieked, then caught herself. I mean, that's not necessary. The judge had heard enough. Miss Whitmore, how do you plead to the charges? What happened next stunned everyone. Instead of entering a plea, Mallory launched into a tearful monologue about her dedication to the community. For 7 years, I've kept Willowbrook Estates beautiful, she sobbed. I've maintained property values, enforced standards, protected our way of life. And this is how they repay me? By believing the lies of a man who can't even follow simple mailbox placement guidelines? She pulled out a thick folder. I have here 317 violations committed by Mr. Levensis Hawthorne over the past 2 years. Grass height infractions, unauthorized horse noises, Mailbox positioning. Miss Whitmore. Judge Hawkins interrupted. None of that is relevant to the federal charges against you, but it shows a pattern of disrespect for authority, Mallory wailed. If he'd just followed the rules, none of this would have happened. The prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, the defendant seems to be confessing that her criminal actions were retaliation for perceived HOA violations. Mallory realized her mistake too late. That's not what I meant. But the damage was done. In trying to paint me as the villain, she'd essentially admitted to using her position for personal vendettas. The judge set bail at $2 million and scheduled the trial for 3 months out. As they led Mallory away, she was still shouting about grass height regulations and the proper positioning of decorative rocks. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. One shoved a microphone in my face. Mr. Hawthorne, how does it feel to be called the man who brought down a massive criminal conspiracy with a mailbox? I thought about Dad, about the secret he'd carried, about the workshop that had protected so many for so long. I just wanted to help our mail carrier. I said honestly, the fact that it exposed all this, that's justice catching up with greed? But the story wasn't over. That night, as I sat in Dad's workshop, the EPA had given me special permission to enter for emotional support. I found something that changed everything. Hidden behind his tool bench was a safety deposit box key taped to a note in Dad's handwriting. Son, if you're reading this, then they've finally come for the ranch. Everything you need is in box 447 at Texas First National. The truth about Brackenridge goes deeper than anyone knows. Protect our neighbors. Dad. The next morning, I went to the bank with Agent Chen. What we found in that box would ensure that Mallory Whitmore and her co-conspirators would never see freedom again. Inside were original documents from Brackenridge Chemical, including internal memos discussing the illegal dumping, but more importantly, there were records showing that Nexus Development's board of directors were all descendants of Brackenridge's original owners. They'd known about the contamination all along because their families had caused it. The final document was a handwritten letter from Dad to me. Son, I've spent 20 years protecting this secret, not to hide the truth, but to prevent panic while I searched for a solution. The workshop contains more than just contamination. It's built over Brackenridge's document disposal site. Sealed in the foundation are thousands of pages that prove not just the dumping, but the bribery of state officials to cover it up. I couldn't expose this while alive because they threatened you, but if you're reading this, they've already shown their hand. In the workshop's northeast corner, under the concrete, is everything needed to bring them down. I'm proud of you. Son, sometimes the smallest actions, like moving a mailbox can, change everything. Love. Dad. With shaking hands, I showed the letter to Agent Chen. Within hours, the FBI had a team carefully excavating the workshop floor. What they found made headlines around the world. Sealed in waterproof containers were original Brackenridge documents, showing payoffs to state environmental officials, and lists of other contaminated sites across the Southwest, and most damning of all, a ledger showing that Nexus Development had been created specifically to profit from these poisoned properties. The investigation exploded nationwide. Within a week, 43 people had been arrested across 5 states. The EPA identified 212 contaminated neighborhoods that had been targeted by the conspiracy. The Justice Department estimated the total fraud at over $10 billion. Mallory's trial became almost anticlimactic after that. Faced with mountains of evidence and co-conspirators racing to make deals, she finally broke down and pled guilty to all charges. At her sentencing, she gave a rambling statement blaming everyone but herself, the HOA board, for giving her too much power, the residents for not appreciating her efforts, and especially me for vindictively moving my mailbox. Judge Hawkins sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay $17 million in restitution. As they led her away, Mallory turned to the gallery one last time. I was a good HOA president, she screamed. The grass was always the right height. The cleanup of Willowbrook Estates took 3 years and $97 million. The EPA revolutionized contamination containment based on Dad's workshop design. The neighborhood, free from HOA tyranny, actually became more beautiful as neighbors helped each other instead of reporting violations. I kept the ranch. Of course, the workshop was carefully rebuilt after the excavation, now serving as both a monument to Dad's courage and a monitoring station for the ongoing cleanup. A plaque by the door reads, "In memory of William Hawthorne, who protected his community in silence and proved that one person's integrity can stand against an ocean of corruption." The mailbox still sits exactly where I moved it, 3 feet closer to the road. Estelle retired last year, But not before the Postal Service recognized her as the mail carrier whose safety concerns had inadvertently exposed one of the largest environmental crimes in American history. And Mallory Whitmore? She's in federal prison, where the grass height is definitely not regulation. And nobody cares about her opinions on mailbox placement. Justice, as it turns out, doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes in work boots and a pickup truck, moving a mailbox 3 feet closer to the road.